there are some really great comics that I could tell you. There's so many good comics, but don't think that they're perfect. They're not perfect, but they're fun.
It's a shame because you're taking the value out of those scores, aren't you, Jim? It's like the 9s and 10s don't mean anything anymore because so many people are just dropping them so easily.
Yeah, and that's why I love the Roundup, because when you can get the things, and if anybody has time and they go and think of like something, and now it only goes back to say 2008, and even that you got to get a little longer in there. You got to get more current to get like a lot of reviews. Sometimes you go back and one person, you can't go by that. But if you think of things that you think are like really, really good events, really big things, and go and look, and if they were back in the day, you look and like, I think it was Flashpoint, and I know that some people love it, some people hate it, or even something like a Blackest Night, which a lot of people love. Like, you go back and look at the reviews and you're like, wait a second, out of this whole series there were only 3 10 out of 10s, and all those issues there were only, and then you look at a current book and there's 15 for a book that when you read it you're like, what the hell were they reading? Like, this is not, it might be fun, it might have its place, you know what I mean? Some comics, like you said, Clobbering Time, you thought it was fun. You don't think it's a perfect comic, though, right?
No.
You liked it more because you had fun, which is fine. And if you go on to a review and say, listen, I understand this isn't the greatest thing, but I'm going to rate it this rating because I think it's fun and people can have a really great time reading it, then that's fine. But these people are like, oh, my God, there's nothing wrong with this. I love the sites that they'll constantly, and there's sites out there, they'll have positive, and then they'll list, hey, I like it. Then they'll have negative. And half the time it's positive, everything. Negative, I wish I could find something, but I'm like, no, that's not the case. You can find a lot of things that are negative in this, but that doesn't mean you're being negative. You're just pointing it out in a review. And,
Jim, on that point, can I ask you, like, I know it's difficult to talk about grading and scores. How do you do that? How do you approach that? Because you have some interesting scores. I like the way you do points on things as well. You know, it's not just a straight 6 or an 8.
And here's the thing, the issue with it is when we first started it, what we do is I read a review or read a comic, and when I go to do a review, I actually have an idea, and it's just an overall deal. It's right. It's a gut feeling overall score, because I think that when you get involved in, you know, some people go 50% art, 50% story, but sometimes, and I'm more of a story guy. I'm not I'm not a full visual guy, so the art to me, that obviously there's good and bad art, but for the most part, when I go through it, I get done, and I've done, I think it was like 3,100 written reviews is how many reviews I've had on the Roundup that comes up, and my average is a 7.2, which I still think might be a little high. I mean, I look at
that's
that, I'm
generous,
like,
isn't it?
Yeah,
that's surprising.
I mean, people say about I'm so negative, but it is a 7.2, but it is because some things are 10, some things are 1, some things are here. So when I get done and I've written all these reviews, but at the end I think like, okay, I think that felt like a 6. And then I start thinking about it, and and then I start thinking about it, and like, you know what? I did like that part a lot, though. So 6.5, but usually it's that deal of I have that gut. Seriously, when we've done this so many times that when we're doing the podcast, I haven't done it a lot lately, but for Eric especially, as we're talking about something, we get to the end, I almost 100% can guess his score by the end. When I say, like, hey, what's your score? I used to say, I know you're a 6.5, and then he'd get mad. I'm a 6.4. He would do that. But even when I do some other things, the Marvel stuff with different people or manga stuff, I can get that feel of, while we're talking about it, of how people kind of feel about it, get a range of the score because of this gut feeling deal. But I've seen sites, because people have come from other sites and written on ours. Gabe, he just ended up saying, can I write on? I'm like, yeah, I asked you. If you ever want to write a review, you're in. You could be in. And so when people do it, and they say to me, well, what's your score deal? How do you do it? I'm like, just give it the score that you feel it deserves. And I never once in all this, and we've had a ton of people in and out at times, I've never once told anybody, change your score. That's too low. That's too high. Because that's their score. But when they say, well, I was on this site, and what we did was we had this formula, and I'm like, I don't need that crap. And so when one guy's telling me, and it's like they give like 3.5 of the points have to be for art, 3.5 for the deal, some for inking, some for lettering, some for colors. I'm like, really? Like you have, I mean, I know that letterers do a great job, and but when I'm reading a book, unless they're like umpires or referees in sports, you only recognize it when they screw up. When you end up like,
you
know
don't
what
notice
I mean?
it. Yeah, exactly.
So to me, they're always doing a great job.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think I've ever had a review where I'm thinking and really I say that during the death metal stuff when you had the Batman Who Laughs and you had that black
God.
with the red font.
I
couldn't read it. I still ended up saying like, okay, that might be on me, but still, the idea of this crazy, like that gets too technical when you're sitting there, and people may be sitting there thinking like that, you're ridiculous, you should do that. But to me, I read the comics and it's just, I don't want to get that technical. It's a feeling. And so by the end, I kind of get, like anybody will say, oh, that's a good comic, that's a bad comic. But to put a score to it, it's a little different, but it's still that deal. So if I give a 10, I'm telling you, there is a comic in the horizon coming that I don't know, I won't be able to say it's a 10, or I'll tell you what it is. It's Green Arrow. The Green Arrow from Joshua Williamson.
I'm looking forward to that.
I'm going to
try it because I've never read the character, Jim. I know him, but I've never read him.
Here's the thing. To me, if I read a comic, manga, anything, and I cry while I'm reading it, because, I'm a grown man. I'm an adult. And so if I end
Big men don't cry.
Yeah, exactly. But if I cry... And say the issue you're reading, it's like, okay, well, the art's a little off, and this, but if I'm crying, that's something. That should be very close to a 10, even if there are things like, well, the ending's kind of wonky. I didn't like the cliffhanger, but if you cry, and I'll tell everybody right now, that Green Arrow, the Green Arrow comic, I cried when I read it. Then I reread it, cried again. Then I talked a little. I didn't want to spoil it to Eric. Just telling him, started getting choked up again. That's how much I was like, oh my God. So, and that hasn't really happened since two things.
Who's writing that, Jim?
It's Joshua Williamson, who I'm not a huge fan of.
No,
I'm not a huge fan. So that gives you the other thing.
Yeah.
Exactly. But every comic, every issue, you give it that full deal. They can always impress. When Rebirth came out, when Barry and Wally hugged, I cried. I ended up, when I was reading it, I cried at that. And it wasn't just because I was a huge Wally fan. It was because that really did feel like, Jeff Johns writing it. He was apologizing for a lot of the missteps from DC. This Rebirth was going to be, listen, we learned our lesson. And it all kind of welled up. I'm like, this is great. I gave that a 10. Then my last 10, I believe, that I gave, it's funny, it's Batman, Tom King Batman. It's issue number 5. It was when Batman goes to Gotham Girl, and after her brother Hank died, and ends up showing that it's Batman. He takes the cowl and actually says, I know what you were going through. And I welled up and I started crying because it was such a good moment. I thought Tom King was the greatest. And it's funny because people
back
sit
in
there.
issue 5, back in those days.
And again, I ended up, it's funny, when she got the jokes and riddles, I lost it. And we were on the podcast and I was going through this and I remember at one point the beginning of the Button story, if you remember that, where you ended up having Reverse Flash coming, and I think it was just beating the crap. And they ended up doing it. He's beating the crap out of Batman in the Batcave, and they're doing it juxtaposed to a hockey game. So it was like a fight in a hockey game, but it was also what was going on in the Batcave. But I played a lot of hockey, and I love hockey, and it didn't make sense what he was saying in a sports hockey deal, and I lost my mind. And people were like, you got to stop it. And I'm like, no, it doesn't make sense. But all that, what I did end up with Tom King then, and a lot of books, I need them to make sense within the comic book. And a lot of times the people, like, they end up, like a Harley Quinn this past week, you just have things happening. It's funny to say, but there's no, like, basis of reality, even in a comic that isn't reality, but you need some sort of grounding point to it, and that drives me nuts when you have MacGuffins out of nowhere and things. But again, it's a gut thing.
Mystery box
it's a real deal. Yeah, I hate that. I hate that so much. And that's what was driving me nuts with the Spider-Man, and they had it in Fantastic Four, all that. But
oh God,
yeah. So we don't really have a technical way of doing
No, I understand that. I'm the same, Jim. I've before comics, I used to. Well, I've still got a blog. I was reviewing sci-fi because you mentioned science fiction. Science fiction books and fantasy books, classics. And I never used to give a score. It's just like this is a high recommend or a recommend for a friend. That's about it. So I need to think about scoring more.
Yeah, that's the funny thing, and even YouTube, like you can at the end, you're like, hey, I recommend this, and that's fine. That's a good enough score. And then you start thinking when you do the reviews, though, with a score, okay, what would I like? What would recommend? Because to me, anything over a 7 is a recommend, and yet nobody thinks that. And then
really?
Yeah, people think that's so negative. And me and Eric were talking about one point. At one point, somebody did ask us, like, how would you say the score is actually equal? And I think I said, like, 9 and above is just great. That's like a must buy. It's one of the
must.
And a 10 is something that's really, really great.
Something special.
And then,
really special.
And then like you get to under a 7. I think I said at one point, like a 6 to a 7 to me is as somebody who's a fan of the character probably would still buy it. But if you're kind of like, I don't really like that, then you avoid. And then under a 6, you start getting to the point where, it's not that great. And I think that we ended up saying only completists or people with runs, because people will buy everything, but they could get it, but it shouldn't be.
That seems to happen with Spider-Man, especially, doesn't it? I've heard of people who will buy every single issue of Spider-Man just to collect it,
happens
even if they're not
Batman
even reading
too.
it.
Yeah. Batman with Tom King. A lot of people kept telling us, like, I don't like this Batman, but I've always collected Batman. I can't stop collecting Batman. So when they did end up telling me I dropped Batman, like that was almost like they're out of comics now, because that's the thing they always got. And if they're not going to like that, they were like, I'm bailing. And that's a lot of it happened after that wedding. That fiasco.
Oh,
people
that was the one, the killer, wasn't it? The killer issue.
I love the idea too. And I heard some behind the scenes things with that, and also when he ended up getting fired off the book, where people are now saying he didn't get fired. No, he did. But the deal with that was after that wedding, when he came out and said, "Well, listen, don't worry, we still have 50 more issues of the story." And I sat there and I thought, you're saying that to people that are so pissed, they're angry at you. You want them to go another 50 issues? Like, they're not going to do it. This could be like you're watching a TV show and, like, in the middle of a thing, they're like, yeah, that really sucked, but we have 50 more episodes that you can watch after this. You're like, screw you. And people bailed. People ended up. And it was tough. Then Heroes in Crisis, another Tom King, people bailed with that. Because
I didn't read that, Jim. I only heard about it. It ruined...
Yeah,
Tom King, didn't it, for a lot of people?
It's bad. And then he kind of started doing just, these Elseworlds Black Label stuff, which that's where he does best. And that's where his fans can enjoy the stuff that he does, but he doesn't ruin characters in the regular continuity. But that's going to change coming up, so I hope he realizes that. I hope he realizes that when these guys or gals take over these characters, they're supposed to be caretakers. They're not. Yeah. He's not going to be the last person to write Wonder Woman. There's going to be other people, so you have to make sure you just don't ruin the character. You can have your stories, you can have ups and downs, but don't come in and ruin.
Don't ruin the character.
It's what
don't
Bendis
write
did with
Superman in the character.
Yeah, and Bendis came into Superman, and what Bendis did with that, he just wanted to change it all to his stuff because it seemed that he didn't know the old stuff, so it's easier to change things and then go forward. And he just didn't get it.
That's got a lot of flack, didn't it?
Yeah,
I read the first maybe 7 or 8 issues, and because I've never been really into Superman, Jim. That's a confession. I was always Batman. I was a Batman guy. So, what was it about that was so bad? You think, Bendis? Is because he tried to change too much?
It's funny because he came in and he promised, I'm not going to change anything, and then he just started changing. I mean, he ended up making Jor-El at one point, really pointing out that he's the one who destroyed Krypton. Like, right there is crazy. Then he backed off, and it was kind of a side deal, and it was this Robo-Czar, but still, the identity, even things that are silly, like the trunks, and he was trying to get people back, like, hey, people liked this before and do it, but then he just went off the rails. Then he aged up John. I mean, the things that he did
crazy decision.
Are still affecting people in books. I mean, that's the craziest thing about it. And that's where people had warned me with Bendis. And it's kind of with Tom King, too, because it happened with Heroes in Crisis, where you end up having a series and you do such crazy things that then you need pretty much damage control to come in afterwards and make things right again. And that's not great. But I said that Heroes in Crisis actually gave us a bunch of different books with Wally, and then also a Poison Ivy deal. So Tom King's the greatest. He ends up having one book that really sucks, but then it spawns like 5 other books. So DC's like, man, we're in the money. And then but these other books try to fix it. And finally with Wally, Jeremy Adams did fix it with Wally in this Flash series, but nobody bought it, so he's off the book, which is a shame.
It's such a shame that, because I got into that late as well. That was via you and Wes and Eric and Sully. They were saying how good it was, and the Flash is another character I've never read before, but I got into it through Jeremy Adams' run. I've got into it now.
Yep, and you got into it because of the family, probably, and all that. It's everybody can kind of recognize the things with that, and then we stop it and go, space horror. Cosmic horror, and like, really?
You can't wait, can you, Jim? Cy Spurrier's coming. What's he going to do? Where's he going to take us? Cy
Spurrier, and it's funny you said before, because I end up reading Grant Morrison, and it gets my head spinning.
Your head starts.
But at the end, even if I don't like I sit there and I read Grant Morrison, I'm like, oh my God, what is he doing with this mind bender and all this? Oh my God. But at the end, after I think about it, I'm like, you know what? That was pretty good. Like it was at least unique. It was Grant Morrison.
Yeah, well,
but
nowadays, I've been a huge fan for years.
And
you might have lost it a bit these days, but I don't know. I was
still,
a huge fan.
Yeah, but afterwards, like you said, Doom Patrol that you read. You know what? Doom Patrol isn't just crazy characters being thrown at you. It was fun. And what I think, it was clever. And I don't see that in the new Doom Patrol. And with Cy Spurrier, I think he's just desperately... There's a bunch of guys who are desperately trying to be Grant Morrison. Because there's that, and then if you ask me, people get mad at me about this, but you have like a Ram V who I think desperately wants to be Alan Moore, ended up doing the Swamp Thing.
Does.
And what you do is you get the facsimile version where the language, it's almost like a cover band. Even the greatest cover band, I was in a cover band. That's how I got through college. I paid for my whole college in a cover band. So we're up there, and we're doing Beatles and Doors songs and Nirvana, stuff like that. But we're never going to be as good as the Doors, Beatles, or Nirvana. It'd be silly to think that. And that's how I think some of these, like Cy Spurrier, he's the cover band version of Grant Morrison. He gets the songs going. He's playing the notes, but you don't get that. You don't have Paul up there on bass. I know, yeah, and it's funny because it's like he's going Ram V, but way of Graham, because it seems Chip Zdarsky, where people are back and forth with this run, that's fine, but he is grabbing a lot of Grant Morrison stuff. I mean, a lot of the Grant Morrison stuff. Yes, he is.
He's really going Grant. He's trying to, isn't he?
He's got the Bat God going. He's got, all of it. I mean, but it actually seems a little bit like his spin. So I don't mind it as much, right? But yeah, Ram V, I said I was in the Slack that we go in for the whole Patreon deal. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, why is everything a metaphor? Why, with Ram V, everything is metaphor, you can't just say I walked out a door and into the bright light. It's like, I walked down to, it was like this, and it became, I'm like, oh my goodness gracious. I said in our deal when we were talking about it, the idea that and it was in our last podcast, the idea that I think of this Ram V Detective Comics as somebody I'm working with, and you go and ask the person a question, and they talk for an hour, and you don't even know what the hell they said. I sit there, and the thing is, though, one of the things about Grant Morrison, it's funny because you're a Grant Morrison fan, but I don't think that you would say to me if I said, oh, I don't know, I don't like that issue, I don't like that series, you would say, it's because you're too dumb. You're just too dumb.
No.
But that's what you get. Not. You get that from some Morrison fans where you say, I don't know, that was a little wacky.
Oh, you just don't understand it, Jim.
You don't get it.
Gray.
Yeah. And that's what happens with Ram V. And again, I said it about a Tom King book. It could be a good book, but it's not a good Supergirl book. I sit there and say, and I'm like, Ram V is a really good writer. The things he writes, he gets too. I think he wants to impress people, and the guy is a smart guy. You can tell from his writing. I don't need it to be thrown at me. Okay, you're smart. He was like a chemical engineer before he became a comic book writer. Tom King was in the CIA. These are guys that are really, really smart. But you don't, and I think Tom King people really like him. I think that a lot of times I say that with Tom King, people are embarrassed to say they like comics, so they can say, oh, well Tom King's comics aren't like those goofy things. They're fancy.
Oh, God,
and I think Ram V's like that too. Yeah. It's like, it's kind of pretentious, the idea of like, well, I don't really like regular, like I would never read that guy, but Ram V, it's more like literature. I'm like,
Ram V would be a good Vertigo writer, wouldn't he?
Yeah, he'd be great.
He would suit that. He's not really a superhero capes and cowls kind of writer, I don't think.
He did good on Swamp Thing, but even then, it drove me nuts because it's that thing, and it's funny, I'm not a huge dark universe type of guy. You know, stuff like I'll read a Constantine, I'll read even a Justice League Dark that I really did like in the New 52, but for the most part, the magic side of things and that stuff, it kind of goes above my head, and I just don't enjoy it. With Ram V and all those things, I like to enjoy comics, but when I'm reading it, I'm like, why are you... It's just telling me I'm a dummy. I'm reading,
this
detective.
I have to work reading this.
Yeah. And then I'm sitting there. The funny play is, and it was with Steve Orlando way back when he would do some DC stuff. And again, nicest guy ever. He has got... We ripped them apart so much in the podcast at one point that he told a guy that when he would go on when the books are coming out Wednesday morning, he would go to look at reviews, and he said he'd have to have a glass of wine before he read my review of his. And it was more Justice League of America. And I thought that it made me laugh, but I felt bad. So I actually ended up at one point, he followed us on Twitter, so I sent him a message. And I said, hey, it's nothing against you or whatnot. And he actually, I understand. I keep doing it, and we talked, and I still occasionally talk to him. Just friendly talk. He's a really nice guy. But some of that crap he writes, it was driving me nuts. So I said that with Ram V, it's now become this sort of thing. Not that I'm saying they're comparable or anything, but the dialogue. When I sit there and I read a book, I've told people this before, because of my issues with my attention, and the other thing is I was diagnosed as a kid with Asperger's is another thing that I end up having. So I end up, like I said, really focused on things. But because of that, I'm one of those people, I can't hear a voice in my head while I'm reading. So when people sit there and say, oh, I hear Kevin Conroy anytime I read Batman. Or I hear it's weird. When I say to people, it's so weird to say, but that has never happened in my life. Like if suddenly I was reading Batman and I heard Kevin Conroy's voice in my head, I'd probably run and try to get an exorcism. I think that's because it's never happened.
Conroy's in my head.
He's in my head. It never happens. I can't. Like one of the big things.
I don't do that either. I don't have the voice. I have my own voice.
Yeah, exactly. And like people will say, like one of the characters, I think that if you have that thing, you can't get away from it. If you read Deadpool, I would say that everybody hears Ryan Reynolds. That would almost be like, but I don't. So when I read, it's funny because it's like I'm like in third grade. I read a lot of times out loud. That helps me remember the things more. But when I'm doing that points out, and I say to people, because most people are reading a comic and they're just reading it, if you actually say the dialogue out loud in those Ram V books, or say a Steve Orlando, you realize then, because you're speaking the lines, that these things don't make any damn sense. I mean, you're sitting there doing these waxing poetic things about opening a door or going down a hallway, and you realize, I would never say this. Like, this is ridiculous.
Nobody talks like this. Not since, the 1890s.
Exactly. And it's fine if you have, like, say you have Vandal Savage show up, and he's like, okay. Even like a Ra's al Ghul will probably talk in a very regal, old school way, because these guys have been alive so long and they've gone through that stuff. But when you have a Harvey Bullock show up and he's like, thine yonder, but you're like, what? Like, what do you think? Harvey Bullock? Like, you have to realize that. And I think that Ram V is kind of in this focus of, he's doing a gothic horror thing with Detective. And he keeps saying it's operatic, but that doesn't mean that every character is on a stage in an actual opera. It's like the idea of thinking when you laugh where there's a musical, and when you're a little kid, a lot of times you'll be like, Mom, why are people running down the street singing and dancing? That doesn't really happen, but it fits in the musical. But in the comic, it's not working for me. Some people love it, but when I ask them, and that's the thing, when somebody says I like something or I hate it, the first thing I say, well, tell me why. Well, what's the reason?
What do you like about it? Or what do you hate about it?
People get mad. They get so mad. They
because it's really good.
Yeah. And again, if you're just reading a book, that's also you got to. If I'm just reading a comic or watching a movie or something, and at the end I say, yeah, I didn't like that. Well, that's just me saying it to myself. I probably have an idea in my head why, but when you're reviewing it and you're telling people to buy or not buy something, you need to. And I always say the idea of like, just because you hate something doesn't mean that you're just negative if you have reasons. But if you just come in and say, I hate it, why? And if you don't, then you are just being negative. If you say, and I said at one point, remember when, oh, that's toxic negativity. You're toxic. At that point right away, I said, you know what? Screw you, jerks, because a lot of you are toxic positive. You're positive toxic, where you end up just saying...
it works both ways, doesn't it?
It's toxic positivity is what I told them, because you're just going to...
coined a phrase.
Yes, you're just giving a 10, and a lot of people... You get involved in the user reviews over at the Book Roundup. Now,
Jim, I've been losing my mind recently about it. The same people keep review bombing, I'm calling it.
It's
certain writers.
Yep.
It's doing my head in.
And so and again, I read all the user reviews. I've seen your user reviews. I always go and I'm like, oh man, he's fighting the good fight here, because a lot of people are just bullcrap there. You actually take your time and do a user review to let people know. Most people just give a score, and if they give one line, that's it. So. And even with that, my things are, I'm a fancy reviewer. I'm up in the review set, but I'll read all of them. I read every review.
I hate the scores, Jim. I hate the 1s and 2s where there's nothing. Just a score. That and then drives me crazy.
Then people will be like, oh no, I got to combat this and give a 10 with no score. So
give
really,
it a 10. Yeah.
In the user reviews, I pay no attention to anything without a written deal. But
me too.
I've seen it too, and I know you have to have seen it, where you will have people give a 10, and their review is actually bitching about the people who gave it a 1. They'll be like, I'm giving it a 10 because too many people give it 1s. I get in fights with these people. Like, what are you doing?
What are you doing?
Oh,
what's your real score?
Gracious. Yeah, what do you actually think? And then they'll be like, I give it a 10. Everything else is negative. And it tried that. And again, back to the whole overall picture, like the reviews from review sites, this is why I've moved now. I finally wised up. I moved to YouTube because...
I was going to ask you about this. Let's bring it around to YouTube. So what made you get into that, and why are you so kind of focused on that at the moment?
Well, the one thing is that we've been, doing our podcast and things for so long. I went and I did see some YouTube stuff where you get that crazy deal of like, I love this because it's great. And I'm like, and then I look and I'm like, that person got 20,000 views for
yeah.
It's driving me nuts. I'm like, we've had this podcast. We're almost at episode 500. We've never, since we started, we're at 479, I think, this week. We've never missed a week. We've never taken off. Have
you been going for, is it 10 years now or not quite?
Yeah, it's 2015 we started. Because at one point we were even having 3 podcasts, so we were doing all this nonsense. But I sat there, I'm like, but also the idea where, quite frankly, people weren't coming to the site as much because I think that they don't trust or they don't care anymore about written reviews, that they think, okay. I
think so.
Yeah, on YouTube, people are there. Now, again, there's a lot of people who will just come on and scream and yell at stuff, and there'll be a lot of people who say it's the greatest thing ever, but it seemed like, you know what, we should have done it a long time ago. We should have started stuff. If we would have started in 2015 and had a lot of stuff on YouTube, who knows, but... Yeah, I think, we would have had something going on. And it's like, oh, man, I kicked myself. And I'm not really big with change. So for the longest time, we're like, no, we have the podcast. We have this. And then podcasts, because of that serial podcast, like, ooh, podcasts are going to go through the roof. I'm like, yeah, the crime junkies and the true crime stuff did. But the other stuff did. There's not really, that's the thing. We've been doing this so long. There's not really that many dedicated DC comic reviews podcasts, and there's really less Marvel ones. Because I just either people don't want to put in the effort or they get. But I thought, you know what, I'm going to do this stuff on YouTube. There's a lot of people that, you know, have never heard of us because they don't listen to podcasts or go to websites.
Right.
And I think that, you know, I thought kind of we've been doing this for so long that I just have to get used to it, and hopefully people will enjoy it. But I see already, you really, when you first start, you almost get the temptation to be either over the top positive or over the top negative, because you see that's what gets the reaction. If I go on and say, hey, listen, you know, this new Tim Drake, I kind of like this part, but I don't like that, people are just like, you're ridiculous. It's all... So it does pay at first, but I keep thinking about when we did the podcast and the website, we try to be honest. We try to not, like I said, we don't fake the funk. That used to be something I would say all the time. And eventually people will kind of get that idea. Okay, this guy, I can trust him. I like his reviews, because I don't want to just be, you know, I can scream and yell with the best of them at points, but it's when I kind of, you know, want to be that and want to do that. So
I like your tagline here, Jim. No frills, no shills.
Yes.
I love it. Straight to the point.
I love slogans. I hit there. I love slogans and I love nicknames. So I ended up like there. And I even thought I had a big banner with a bunch of DC characters and Marvel, and I'm like, nah, you know what? I just want it like straight up, almost generic, because again, I'm just right now, for the most part, just reviewing stuff, just reviewing the comics. There's nothing that fancy about it, but
no,
I
really
try
like
to just
your
do the
thumbnails.
stuff. And,
you've changed your design, haven't you? You've brought in a kind of...
I want it to be coherent, and I want it to
really
be something that eventually you kind of like, okay, I get it. I see some things you see. I got lazy because like that Marvel Gods deal.
Me too.
I was like, yeah, I don't have time to make. What am I going to do?
Me too. I'll do that.
Only
I'll
have
do that
too.
too.
Screw that. But yeah, I'm trying to get things a little more.
No, these are good. I like these
and stuff like
these
that.
These stand out.
Have some fun things, and even then, like one of the things that we always talked about on the website and even the podcast, there's stuff like, I mean, you can look like that manga review. If you have the manga, I know it's not going to get as many views, but I don't like that it's silly, but I don't like that to be the
though,
thing.
Jim. Some manga ones do.
Some do.
Some will take off.
I don't want to sit there. I know, because that's what I see sites doing, and then it kind of skews things. The idea of, well, that didn't get looked at a lot, so I won't do that anymore. And I don't like. I like to just do whatever. You know, I would think that a Blue Beetle isn't going to get as many views as, say, a Spider-Man. But I'll still do the Blue Beetle one because nobody else is doing them because nobody's looking. But eventually, I hope that it's like one of those where people. And one of the things that really shocks me as I'm looking at the screen, Star Wars comic reviews get nothing. I mean, those fall flat as on. I don't know why.
That's a surprise because they still sell pretty well, don't they? They sell okay.
Yeah, they sell good. So if I review a Darth Vader like I did, it'll get nothing. But if I got on and started screaming and yelling about how Star Wars sucks now, which I'm a little disappointed with it, that would go through the roof. But
5,000 views.
Yeah, that's just not my thing. It's like, I just review the stuff that I like and maybe get people to like it as
Jim,
well.
I'm the same. I sometimes wonder maybe that it doesn't really worry me because I'm not in it for the money, whatever, success. But I'm trying to be honest. But like, I'm very positive, and I do kind of choose things to review that I enjoy. I don't scream and shout, and I don't want to. So I don't think I get that much engagement because of that.
It's funny too when I do the podcast. If I'm doing something with other people, like even with you today, if I'm by myself, I'm not going to scream and yell as much because I'm not a guy like I always said it would be the worst reaction videos. I'd be there and it'd just be me staring at something because I'm not going to sit there. I see people. It started out in the NBA, I think, with the dunk contest where they'd have the slam dunk contest. And I'd see people are falling out of their chairs, other NBA players. And then I watch these reaction videos. These guys are like, they fly backwards, crap's going everywhere. I'm like, who reacts like that? Who sits there at home and like, ah? And then the worst is, I say that, my kids who have grown up on YouTube, I hear them down there. I'm like, what are they yelling at? They're reacting to stuff like they've learned to react. Like people can't just be calm anymore. And it drives me nuts. But yeah, when I'm doing this stuff by myself in these videos, I'll tell you what I don't like or like, and I'll get a little bit animated, but I'm not going to just, this is the way, like, I'm not like Crazy Eddie, if you know what those commercials were back in the day, which not a lot of people do. It's a local deal. This guy would lose his mind. And, so again, I think that it's one of those where, and we had this YouTube channel for a while, but didn't do anything with it. So I've really been like kicking it in like in December.
You used to drop the podcast on, didn't you?
Yeah, it was just the podcast. That was it. And that was done automatically. But yeah, the whole thing with YouTube, it's exciting though. And again, like I said,
it is exciting.
I have these things going on, and with me, I always, need something new to get involved with, to get me excited again about it, because talking about the comics, and the Western comics are a little down right now, though there are some really good books. But that's
one thing I was going to ask you, is if it's okay before we finish, what do you say to the people who decry Western comics, to say, okay, the American comic book industry is pretty much dying, it's on its last legs, especially the big two, DC and Marvel? What do you say to that?
No, it's tough, because I sit there and read this stuff, and a lot of it, and again, people will go and make sides about this stuff. And again, I hate when you hear I love catchphrases and slogans, I told you, but when you do that and base everything like the idea of get woke, go broke, okay, I get it. But there's more wrong than just that. That the writing now isn't just the writing it's bad. But it's because I think that a lot of these comic book writers, first off, they're not going to make the big money working at the big two. They don't own those characters, so they're going to go indie. They're going to go when that's Substack or Kickstarter, all that. So they need to find people who are passionate about the characters. But most people come on, it's like a brand type thing. Hey, if I get on Batman, my brand goes through the roof, and then I can go off and do my own thing. And that's the problem. And some of these writers are bad, but don't judge, everything by, say, the Clone Rads, right? Don't judge everything by this Tim Drake book. Don't Megan Fitzmartin. Don't judge everything if you don't like even a Zeb Wells on Spider-Man, because there are some good things. And I think right now with stuff like World's Finest and even Joshua Williamson's Superman, only 2 issues in, I really like, and the Action Comics, Philip Kennedy Johnson. We said Jeremy Adams on Flash. I think that those sort of books are actually better than a lot of things we've had in years upon years. It's just that there's a lot of really bad stuff. So at this moment, I don't think people should bail from Western comics. You just have to be picky with your stuff. And then eventually, hopefully, if you are, they'll realize that, okay, it's not just people don't like Tim Drake, or they don't like the writing. And if you do support the books that are really good, and everybody has their favorites, but there are some clear-cut winners right now at both of the companies. If you support them, just don't end up supporting. They'll have to figure this out. And if they don't, they'll go out of business. So they're going to have to give us what we want, what we need. And the thing is, whether you're on one side of a fight or the other, I think that everybody just wants fun, good-written comics, and anything
that's
could
what
be
we
that.
want. It's not asking too much, is it?
No.
Jim, if you have to recommend a couple from each publishing house, like a couple of DC, a couple of Marvel, current titles, who
I
would you
would
go
say
for?
World's Finest by Mark Waid is really easy to recommend, especially if you are an older comic reader, because it kind of goes Silver Age even and is fun.
Yeah, it does. It's
so
very,
it's like
very good.
It doesn't feel like a book that it could be coming out at any time. So I think that that's good. But Jeremy Adams, unfortunately, The Flash is ending. I really like the first 2 issues of Superman, and then it's tying into the Action Comics, which is an anthology. Just don't read that Power Girl story recently.
Oh, God.
That's one of the worst things I've ever
Speaking
written.
about reading out dialogue out loud, if you can't read that out loud, Jim.
It's insane. Nobody talks like that, and you're like looking at a character. You're like, I don't even know who this character is.
What are they talking about?
So, but what's great about that Action Comics being an anthology, that story's done. It's gone. It's going to go off. It's going to have its own one shot that I'll probably read just to see how bad it is.
Just to see, yeah.
Oh my God! But you have those, like I said, now you have the dawn of DC, and I think that everybody can, even like we said, the Unstoppable Doom Patrol, I didn't love, but I'm going to check it out, and there's always a chance that it gets better as we go on. But even if it's not, it's something on the side. Some people like the TV show. They might enjoy it because it has that feel.
Get through that.
You know, and so the Dawn of DC books, though, so far, Superman. Actually, they've been pretty good. Coming up is Green Arrow, and I think that people will really enjoy that. And then you have some things coming down the line. But the current stuff, I'm trying to think, because I did a video of my 3 favorite DC books, and I did have World's Finest, Superman, and Flash. So I had those.
Yeah,
and
that's it. That's great.
And I said I like the Stargirl Lost Children, and that's going to go into the JSA book. And that's another one. It's the story isn't, but the art is great, and it's so much fun. You just smile the whole time you're reading because of these kids and these sidekicks. And then I was going to do a video for my top 3 Marvel books, and I kind of couldn't figure out 3.
Oh my God,
and
right?
it's just the ones I'm enjoying. I'm not saying books because people be like, "Oh my God, that Moon Knight's great," or that the Ghost Rider is really. People do like a lot of the stuff going on. It's personally, they're not my favorite things going on, but I still do like Strange Academy Finals. I think that's a really good all ages book. I love Daredevil, even though it was down a bit, but I love that last issue. And as we talk, probably a video might have just gone up. I had it scheduled for some time. I can't remember, but of the newest Daredevil, which I think is really, really good.
It's good. It's good.
Yeah, stuff like
apart from the art, Jim.
The art kind of went
bad.
Off. Yeah, I actually, my score went down a bit for that art, but it's really good. And there's some shocking things that happen in it. But the problem I think that we have, and it's DC is doing better. I'll even say Chip Zdarsky's Batman is pretty good. Some people, they kind of go against it, and it's kind of that thing. And if you haven't read Nightwing and you don't mind the story doing nothing, you might like because Nightwing is a book that it's like, hey, look at this great character, but it never gets past that. And Dick Grayson is my favorite character. I told you that, Nightwing, and I need more than that because it's weird to have a book that's seemingly just putting Nightwing on a pedestal of all pedestals, and yet I got tired of it really quick. But I think that a lot of people jumping back in might enjoy that. But yeah, there's some good stuff.
It's
but
crazy,
again,
Jim. For me, for Marvel, it's as you were saying, it's really difficult to even choose 3. I would go with you. I'd go with Daredevil. I was loving that when he first started it,
it was
and
great
then they relaunched it. I don't know why they did that. Why they did the relaunch, but anyway, it's been good. Strange Academy, I got into it later through you
but
guys.
It's fun.
Thinking Critical. It's really good. It's fun.
Yeah,
but fun. I can't think of a third. I wanted to say Spider-Man, but I'm just like at the moment. Spider-Man.
And I was going to say the problem is when you end up like if you're at DC and you're a DC fan and say the Tom King Batman, some people liked it, but if you didn't, that really puts a damper on the whole thing. And I think that's the same how I'm feeling with Spider-Man. When Spider-Man isn't doing, and not even just doing good, it's pretty bad. I mean, it is. You read that and you're like, why? Why are you doing this? And you're meandering.
Why?
Then you're given the mystery box, like you said, and you don't want Peter and MJ together, but you go so far to have a family with kids, and you're like, oh my God. And that puts a damper on the whole run, of the whole line. I mean, the idea of Spider-Man, but yet best-selling comic right now.
I know, right?
That's the problem. And I don't know if you ever saw it. If you didn't look it up, just look up Rob Liefeld fights with Scott Snyder. It is the greatest thing that ever happened because Scott Snyder was online. I think he started crowing about Batman. Oh, my Batman. And Rob Liefeld jumped on and said, it's not you, dude, it's Batman. Batman's the star here, not you. And they got in a huge fight. To the point where Rob Liefeld then put out the DMs. Like, poor Scott Snyder was DMing Rob Liefeld, and then Rob Liefeld just took a screenshot and put it. But the thing is, Rob Liefeld's such an old guy with his button-fly jeans that he didn't know how to take a screenshot, so he put it on his phone or his laptop and took a picture of the screen, so he did his own. And the funny play is, it was like a tablet or a phone, but it had the screen was cracked. And people were like, Jesus Christ, you make so much money and you can't even get
a cracked screen?
Yeah, you got a cracked screen. And that became a thing. But it's true. If Zeb Wells is sitting there, and I don't think he's sitting there saying it's the best-selling book just because of me. It's the best-selling book because it's Spider-Man. And that makes it more sad to me that people are there. They want good stuff, but they're so willing to just follow that character till hell and beyond. Even if it sucks like a Batman, like your favorite character, the idea, like, come on, give these people are supporting this garbage, even through this, give them something. And I said, Marvel with this Mary Jane and Peter stuff, it almost feels to me like not only are they not giving it to you, but they're making fun of you and they're shoving it in your face, and it feels sadistic at points. Like, come on now,
editorial or I don't know.
Yeah. And Nick Spencer's run was my first actual reading through a run as it came out. And I liked some of it. I didn't like some of it. But at the end, at least there were points where I was like, oh, this is cool. Yeah, meandered. He had his own mystery going with Kindred, but it wasn't the same kind of deal. But then I get in that Beyond stuff. I thought that was garbage. I ended up reading. I'm like, this is just complete garbage. And Ben Reilly, a character that I didn't know that much about, but since I've read, because what I get, I love getting inspired to read a character because I read something, right? But I don't like getting inspired that I read it because this stuff sucks. And then people are like, no, you have to read that. And unfortunately, Ben Reilly doesn't have a ton of really great, but I read some stuff, but I'm like, you're doing nothing. That Beyond, then we get into this, I'm like, what the hell? It's funny where that whole deal went, York, PA, that's right near me. It's very close where Peter ended up, where all that stuff were blowing up and stuff like that. So I always, in the review, I have to point out, because York, PA is a disaster. That place is a mess. It really should be wiped out. Remember the band Live? That's where they're from. That's like the biggest thing that came out of York, PA, as a band. York, PA. Yeah, that's it. It's a wreck. But it's funny too, like Scranton, where they have the office at the U.S. office, and they have that place is that is a meth capital of everywhere. It is awful. You go to that. Oh, it's the worst. You don't want to go there. Like people, I could just imagine, like, I want to go there because the office, and you go there, you're going to be robbed and probably end up with your pants off in some freaking cheap hotel with your kidneys out, and you're in a bathtub with ice. Yeah, it's that bad. It's bad. But yeah, York, PA, and all that. I'm like, oh God, here we go. But.
Does anyone care, Jim, anymore, what Peter did or what happened? No one cares.
I kept saying it went too long. You get to a point where if somebody keeps telling you, oh man, I got this great secret I'm going to tell you, they go 2 years without telling you, you just say, screw you. You get mad.
Yeah, I'm out of here.
And then the secret has to do with something 2 years ago that you forgot about. I said it's gone on too long that you really have to hit, and then when you're hitting with, oh, this is a character that I did in a 3-issue deal, and I'm like, really? Like, I really am not concerned with that. We'll see. And me and you'll be reading and reviewing it because, we're doing that. But I hope...
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
I hope something happens good, but I don't expect it. I don't expect it at all.
Okay. I'll tell you what, Jim, this has been awesome. We'll wrap things up if that's all right. And I'll drop links in the description when I drop the video, of course, to your channel, to your Patreon as well. So please check them out. The Patreon's amazing. The content on there.
We have a lot of stuff there. I said I was going through and I was looking at other Patreons and things, and I'm like, they have 100 posts. We have over 3,000 podcast episodes.
3,000.
And the thing is, though, we broke the deal because I think Patreon doesn't have a good indexing system, and it's very obvious because if you'll never know some of the things. So I try to regurgitate some stuff so that people are aware of some of the things that we did in the past because we have so many.
That's a good idea.
Eric told me that we do too much, and you see, he's bailed on me a lot on the Patreon. He said to me, it's like, I do enough already, is what he told me. I'm like, whatever. And people would just say to me, hey, did you read the Doom Patrol? I'm like, oh, do a podcast on that, because it ends up like everything needs a podcast in my mind. And it's kind of come to a point where I'm at a point where I don't know that I could add any more, but I do want to add an X-Men show with classic X-Men stuff. But because I want to get into, I usually do these podcasts as a way to get into things myself. So I have these reading clubs and stuff, but that's more for me to enjoy it. Like we said, I don't read stuff to enjoy it because I keep making podcasts about them. I could just sit there and read, say, The Walking Dead, but because I never read it. But hey, I'll do a podcast, so we do that. So it's fun. I have a good time doing it.
It's good. And I always enjoy seeing you on Thinking Critical's channel on the Comics Aficionados on Saturday. For me, it's Saturday night. I love that show.
Yeah, I do too. That. And it's funny because I've actually had some people either way, like, why do you talk to Wes? He's a hater. I'm like, no, he isn't.
He isn't.
And that's the thing. I end up judging people by how they, act and how they treat me and whatnot. And Wes is a great guy. Me and him have talked for a while now, and then just suddenly he said, "Do you want to be on the show?" I had watched the show, never went and said I want to be on it or anything. And then he ended up, Gabe was on it, and so he asked me, and I'm like, yeah, I'll do it. And he's asked me to do some separate videos and stuff, and I have a lot of fun doing them. And and even there might be people on those panels in that show that 100% I disagree with what they say, or they do the same with me, but that's okay. That's why I like it. That's why I go on it.
It's good to have debate. We used to be able to do that. We used to be able to debate things, have positive arguments almost.
Positive arguments. And if it got personal or whatever, you can punch the person right in the face. That's good. That's why I always liked hockey, and I played all sports. Hockey's the greatest because if somebody talks crap to you, you can legitimately beat the crap out of them within the rules of the game. So I love that. And I sit there, and on Twitter, I sit there and watch. People are saying this stuff, and I'm like, you would never have said that before if we were there face to face. You wouldn't say it. So I
Jim,
try to keep
don't
that
let Twitter make you lose your mind.
I know.
And don't let YouTube comments bother you as
comments,
well.
I can't help it. I end up where if I'm on the Thinking Critical show, I'll go back months later to make sure nobody's talking crap on me in the comments.
Everybody does it, I'm sure.
I
hit
only latest comments. Wes told me at one point, I'm arguing in videos of his with people, and he's like, don't worry about those people. Everybody has their deal, but people are trolls, and I'm like, I can't help it.
They want you to do it. They want you to get a reaction from you, from whoever, don't they?
It's funny because I'll be on a video with Wes, and then I'm the one arguing, and he'll say to me why are you arguing with people? I can't help it. I sit there, it drives me nuts. I do try to stay away. I can't. I just fight with everybody, but it's not really fight. I start out by a discussion, and then it turns into a fight somehow, and then I get angry, and it's just nonsense. People can't have a discussion anymore with differing points.
Lost art of discussion.
Yeah,
it
is.
Debate.
It's crazy. Social media will go down as one of the best and worst things that ever happened, ever.
I think so too.
Yeah, and it's a shame, but some people, they think they're more important now just because they can tweet out things and whatnot, but everybody's the same. That's how I go with. And again, if you end up watching a video on either of our shows or any of the things going on, it's not that we're saying that somebody's dumb because they like something we don't, or vice versa. You're just giving your opinion. The reviews are an opinion, and some people take it a little more seriously than others, is all I'll say. But it should be your own honest opinion, and then there's no fight about that. That's just what it is.
That's what people come to it for, Jim. That's what they're coming to you for. They want to hear your opinion. Maybe in the beginning they'll see Batman or Spider-Man, so they want to see a Batman video.
Yeah.
But eventually you're going to get people coming for your take, for your voice.
And just as a last thing, I did say way back with the podcast, I noticed some people, and I would tell people, listen, you may come in, and sometimes it is a shock. You come into our podcast. We try to have fun. We laugh about things, but we will give comments, and we might not like something, but I think that some people get shocked, oh my God, nobody hates Mr. Miracle, but then they go off, and you'll eventually get to that point where you read an issue and you're like, this issue stinks, and then listen to a podcast and they're like, it's the greatest thing ever, and don't have an opinion about it, just say that, and you'll eventually go back to somebody who has an honest opinion. Whether it's your opinion, but it's an honest opinion, so you get that take, and I think eventually it does go to there. I've seen a lot of these. Guy said, I had a podcast once, and I'm only going to talk about positive things, and you said you're a positive guy, but you're not going to just make things positive.
You're talking about me, aren't you?
Yeah, no, I'd say this guy, these people actually said they were going to be like the anti-weird science. We're just going to make everything positive, and they ditched it in 6 months because people could see through it. People aren't dumb.
Yeah.
They know when you're
not
yelling.
being honest.
Yeah, I could sit there and scream and yell, but they're going to know that's not really him, and he doesn't mean it. And again, you said you're positive. That doesn't mean that you're going to love every Spider-Man.
Everything. No.
So I think that's the foundation of, okay, he's a positive guy, so him not liking Spider-Man. And I think you and Sully are the most positive guys that I know. I know a lot of miserable pricks.
Sully's unbelievably positive.
Yes,
yeah,
it's funny too, because I sit there, I'm like, man, that Gray is so positive and so nice. And then when you're with Sully, I'm like, I don't know. Sully goes above and beyond. It makes you look miserable. Sully's so happy. And then again, he has his pod or his YouTube channel where even when you watch that, it's like he is just smiles and everything. But I still realize, okay, that's him. And so if you or him don't like something, holy moly, like it's got to be pretty bad. So that's how I like when you get that relationship with people you listen or watch. Like I start to figure out, okay, and you'll start getting a thing where you'll read something and go, oh, Gray's going to hate this, or oh my God, Jim's going to say this, or Eric's going to. I like that. That's one of the things that I always said is neat when people are like, oh, I read the new detective and knew you were losing your mind. I'm like, yeah, I wasn't. It's fun, but people get a relationship with you if you're honest and just give your opinions honestly and stuff like that, and not just be a phony.
That's been one of the best things for me about, as you're saying, about not just social media, about this kind of space, this format, YouTube. It's getting to meet people, like you, like Wes, like Sully, all the people who we've got common interests, and we just want good comics. That's all we're looking for, Jim.
Yeah. That's it. And people will sit there and say, well, why are you so negative? Well, there's not a lot of great comics now.
There's a lot of crap out there. That's why we're maybe sometimes negative. We're not going out to be negative, are we? We're looking for a great comic.
It's great. When you actually review something that's good, it makes you happy. There are times, legitimately, if we have all bad I say at the end of a podcast, like, I'm depressed right now, and I'm not just joking.
That was terrible.
And we get done, and I just sit there. I'm like, why do we do this? This is awful. I feel just bad. And then I start thinking, like, we just ripped this thing, and somebody's going to like it. I get all nervous and jerky about it. But just as an aside, before we go, we didn't talk much about it, but if you are frustrated with a lot of the Western comics, manga is really good. And the point where when people think of manga as just one thing, it's not just one company, it's not just one type of, there's so many different things that you can find at manga, and it is overwhelming at first, but seriously, if you just go to get the Shonen Jump app, which is like $2.99 now. It went up a little, but it's still easily
so cheap,
check
though.
that
it's
out.
Amazing.
And then there's a site, Manga Plus. Manga Plus, go to that because they have a lot of other things free, and it's legal. It's fully legal. They're in like a deal with Viz and Shonen Jump and stuff like that.
Okay.
And just go through a bunch of like number ones. And yes, it's going to be tough for people to go right to left, but it becomes second. You get used to it. If I can get used to it, anybody can. And if you like superhero stuff, there's superhero stuff. If you like mecha, it's not just one thing. A lot of people think of manga as just like
so
one
many
deal.
different categories of manga. Yeah, people don't realize
there is.
There's manga about chess, Jim. Isn't there? There's manga about cooking, of course.
There's manga about chess that is one of my favorite mangas. That Blitz manga
way.
that came out is one of my favorite. We did that on our show for a while. And my buddy Luke, who does the thing, that's one of his favorite books. He thought Gary Kasparov in that was a ghost because he didn't know who Gary Kasparov was and thought he was dead.
What's it called, that one, Jim? Sorry,
Blitz. It's called Blitz.
Oh, okay.
It's really good. It's so funny that Gary Kasparov's in this, but he's like a digitized version, and he thought he was a ghost. And I'm like, you are crazy. But there's like something that I never knew of, Rakugo. The storytelling deal where you sit on a stage and it's a Japanese thing. I didn't know anything about, but one of my favorite mangas right now is a Rakugo manga. Akane Banashi is one of my favorite ones right now.
Akane Banashi.
I
remember the first one coming out.
It's so good. And again, you wouldn't think of the idea of, I'm going to read this DC book about chess, or I'm going to read that, but it all works out because it's its own individual deal. You don't have to worry about continuity. You start at the number one. Off you go, and you can pick something like a One Piece. You'll never get caught up. It's going on so long.
Unbelievable.
And we do these these reading club podcasts, and I do personally by myself a Dragon Ball one, which obviously is old and stuff, but I love it. And I've never read or watched the cartoon. I never read, and I love that.
Me
but we
neither.
Also, I never did, and everybody always talked. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm
I feel like I
Super
missed out with
Saiyan.
that,
I'm
Jim,
like,
we didn't have it in the UK growing up. We didn't have Dragon Ball.
No, so it's crazy. And we'll do a podcast, and Eric will start mentioning, Goku and stuff, and I won't even know what now I know. but
Now
we have
you
that.
know.
And there's like My Hero Academia. I think anybody can get into. Anybody can.
I hear a lot of praise for that one particularly.
It's so good.
If you like superheroes, you should read that one.
And if you like the X-Men, it's got that. But it's kids. But again, it's like that. And one point, Scott Snyder got on Twitter and demanded anybody who likes what I do, go read My Hero Academia, because he's a huge fan. Because his kids started reading it, and so even Western cut, like, they're into it as well. It's really good. But you have horror stuff, you have slice of life. It's so good. Just give it a shot, and I think that most people can find something to fall in love with. I'm not telling you ditch all the Western stuff, but it adds in that deal. A lot of people like Kaiju #8. It's a big one that a lot of people talk about, and One Punch Man.
I've got the first volume of that.
Yeah, it's good. It's not my favorite, but it's good. And I think that now that people are, watching more anime as well, they're going to go and read some manga. It doesn't need any, really. I don't need to push it. It's a sensation.
It's become huge, hasn't it?
Yeah,
huge
it's humongous. Yeah, because, and it just, again, I keep saying the last thing, but just if anybody was watching that writes comics and is on social media, all that, the Japanese mangakas, the people who create these mangas, they respect their fan base. They actually, you have
huge.
things. I said it makes me laugh that if you're reading Demon Slayer, a book that's outsold all of comics, they said at one point, all Western comics combined, Demon Slayer sold more of in this period of time.
No way.
And the Demon Slayer creator, after every chapter, the guy is just apologizing and thanking you. And these people, it's culture, part of it, but they really do. They're really happy to be able to do what they're doing, and I think some of these Western comics, it's like they're angry to be doing what they're doing.
I know.
And want to fight people about it, and it's crazy. But I do love it. I do love all comics. Comics are so fun. It's like the perfect thing for me, because you can just sit down, you're by yourself, you're going through it. You don't have to go to a movie theater. I used to love movies, but comics took over that for me.
Well, that's interesting. Oh, mate, this has been amazing. We could keep talking.
We went way too long.
Night.
You told me, you were like, do you think we could go an hour? I'm like, oh, he's never recorded with me. I got diarrhea of the mouth.
I was worried about, one thing I was worried about your time. Then we'll keep you too late. And it's, what time is it here? It's midnight 30 here, so I need to wrap things up. But this has been awesome, Jim. I really appreciate you coming on.
No problem. I loved it. Whenever you want to do anything, I'm in. I always like talking comics.
That's great, and I'm really happy to see your YouTube channel taking off, because it is. You must have been enjoying that. You've seen it going up, surely.
Yeah,
over
it's
the last
going
few
up.
months.
Again, I told my wife, I'm like, it's got. Of course, I'm like, why isn't it bigger, whatever? But every time I wake up, if we have a couple new subscribers, we're getting near 1,000, so that's like the first hurdle that people go to. So that's pretty cool, and hopefully people, like it. But again, one person quits. You don't know who it is, the way that it's spelled out, but it drives me nuts. I get sad. I'm like, why? It's almost like I'm like Scott Snyder and Tom King. I need that acceptance. I'm like, why are you ditching me like my father? Why? My dad did. Now you're doing it. Oh, it's all that going through my head, because I'm nuts. But the nuts bit makes me do a lot of videos, so it's fun. It is fun. And if people check it out, I hope they enjoy it.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, we'll wrap up things. So whoever's still out there, thank you so much for watching, for listening. Please check out Jim from Weird Science Comics. He's got YouTube, he's got the blogging site, he's also got a Patreon site which does incredible amount of content, as you said, like thousands and thousands of episodes.
Wow.
So good. So yeah, I hope to catch up with you again soon, maybe on Wes's channel sometime.
Yeah.
It'd be great to do something together again, Jim, anytime. Just let me know.
It would be, yeah. You let me know. I'm in.
Awesome. Okay, we'll stop recording here, but there we go.